team for the Tigers. Here's your ball game. Nick Marshall stands in, steps up, he's going to throw downfield, just a home run ball, and it is tipped off. And Lewis got it on the deflection. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Touchdown Auburn. Touchdown Auburn. A miracle in Jordan Hare. Byron waits for the snap into place. There it is. The kick is up. The kick is good. Auburn wins. The Auburn Tigers are on top of the college football world. 56-yarder. It's got, no, does not have the leg. And Chris Davis takes it in the back of the end zone. He'll run it out to the 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game.
You are listening to the Jboy Show, your number one source for Auburn and the SEC.
What's up, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this Monday edition of the Jboy Show. Got a really special guest today, the voice of the Auburn Tigers, Andy Burcham. Andy is a great guy all around. I know a lot of this audience knows exactly who he is and listens to him on a regular basis. He does a phenomenal job. Andy, if you don't know, is the voice of Auburn basketball, Auburn football, and Auburn baseball. He co-hosts Tiger Talk. And really, if you turn on anything in Auburn, you'll probably hear Andy's voice at some point. So he's, like I said, he's an unbelievable guy. We're really thankful that he's joining us on the show today. Going to talk about a little bit of everything, a little football, a little basketball, because he has a really unique perspective sitting in the position that he sits, being able to see the things that he sees and then being able to kind of see it come together on Saturday, all while letting everybody know what's happening in front of him. So again, should be a really good episode, part of a really big week. Before we do get started, I do want to thank our partners over at the Investor Brand Network. They have over 500 clients, over 40 trusted brands, including ours. They do a really good job. You can find them. It's very simple to find them. Just Google Investor Brand Network. You can go to investorbrandnetwork.com. They have everything, technical solutions, everything to really kind of get your name out there and get you going. So again, we're really thankful for them and thankful for Andy for joining us. And with nothing further ado, let's get after it. What's up, everybody, and thank you guys for joining us for a very special edition, this Monday edition of the Jboy Show. We're here with the voice of the Auburn Tigers, co-host of Tiger Talk, a guy that if you're in the Auburn area, you're connected to Auburn in any way, you've heard his voice multiple times, and that's Mr. Andy Burcham. Andy, thanks so much, man.
Glad to be with you today, Jake. How are things, bud?
Going good.
Good.
Glad to see that things are kind of getting back, gearing up a little bit, and I just, like I said, it's a pleasure to have you on, and you have a very unique perspective, and I'm excited to get it.
My pleasure to be with you today, Jake. I'll tell you as much as I know. How about that?
Yes, sir. That's it. We'll take that any day of the week. But kind of starting off there, are there kind of in your position, are there some storylines, other than really the most obvious that's out there with the pandemic, kind of going into this 2020 football season with Auburn? Is there anything really that kind of sticks out in your head?
Well, I think if you're just looking at the makeup of this team right now, from an offensive standpoint, it's that offensive line that has to form. I mean, I think they thought by now they would have a much better idea about who is going to be first team, second team, perhaps on that offensive line, but they lost the entire spring practice in doing so. So I think they feel good about Nick Brahms at center. I mean, he was there at the end of last season and is finally healthy again for Auburn. But who is going to be to his right and his left at tackle and at guard? Yep. I think that's a great big question mark, and one that perhaps I know that they would have loved to have a much better idea about going into summer workouts and getting ready for fall camp.
I agree, and I think it's safe to say, Andy, that not having the spring probably hurt that position group the most, just because of the, not lack of talent, but the lack of experience, and that's a huge thing overall, but especially at that position. Now looking on the other side of the ball, Andy, I mean, it's a Kevin Steele defense. It's an Auburn defense. So you're going to have good players. They're going to play hard. Or is there a guy that may be a little sneaky to you that maybe you've heard about on that defensive side of the ball that Auburn fans will get to know this fall a little better?
I don't know if sneaky is the right way to put it, but I'm very interested to see what kind of role Big Cat Bryant has for this team this season. In what role does he step up? Does he become the next Derek Brown, Marlon Davidson? Not only from a production standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint. Because to me, it's kind of his defensive line to take over at this point. And I think we have seen glimpses of what Big Cat can do. And I thought we saw him coming on at the end of last season, but he had some guys playing alongside him that, are going to play on Sundays now in the NFL. So I think from a defensive line standpoint, he's the guy that needs to step up for Auburn. And I think he will under Rodney Garner, a guy that played with your dad.
Yep.
And I think Rodney is as good a coach out there, position coach out there. And then the guys right behind, it's very interesting because you know this as well, Jake. Going into last season, the 2019 season, we knew that this was going to be a very talented and deep defensive front.
Yes.
And I think it will be a deep defensive front again this year. It's just not those huge names like Marlon Davidson and Derek Brown up there.
Yeah.
We knew there was a ton of experience in the secondary last year.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys have either been drafted, including Noah Igbenogany, in the first round, or they have signed free agent contracts. There's enough of those guys coming back. But last year, the big question mark was linebacker.
Exactly.
And to me, going into the 2020 season, the strength, the experience for Auburn, the leadership for Auburn is that linebacking core now with T-Will as the position coach.
Yeah.
And KJ Britt and Zacoby McClain and Owen Pappo. All those guys had a year of experience under their belt to develop. And now they're the leaders of that defense, where a year ago, at least at the start of the season, there was a bit of a question mark there.
Yeah, and I think you encapsulated it perfectly. And I think Rodney Garner does an unbelievable job of getting guys to pass the mantle. And then guys speaking of Big Cat, the guys that get the mantle know, what is expected of them. And I think, just kind of like you're hinting at, I think you will see Big Cat Bryant really become a different player, a much more impactful player, especially from a pass rush standpoint. But, Andy, it's crazy you kind of talk about the linebacker position because it does go from being the most, we don't know to now it's the premier position on the defense. And you have legitimate NFL players from KJ to Zacoby. I mean, even looking at the guys they signed, the Wesley Steiners, Desmond Tisdale, guys like that. So, that room is loaded. Now, from your perspective and just looking at it, with Chad Morris coming in on offense, obviously you're close to everybody there. Do you see, and I don't want to use the term dramatic, Andy, because I think it'd be dramatic for me to use that term, but will you see a tweak in the offense that kind of Chad Morris has his staple in a little bit?
Well, I think that's to be seen at this point, Jake, because, what that is, listen, it's still Gus Malzahn's offense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Gus Malzahn's team. I don't think we're going to see Gus just completely step away from this offense.
Yeah.
Do you?
No, I do not at all. I do not at all. And that's why I try and caution people,
right?
And that's really why I didn't want to use the term dramatic and really tweak. Just again, not even from a play calling standpoint, just maybe from a design, maybe an early down design standpoint, just something maybe a little fresh that Auburn can use that's not on tape.
Well, and you know what? Again, it's to be seen because I think not only would we have watched an offensive line start to form.
Yes.
But I think we would have started to see, and we'd have at least had an 8-day game to watch Chad Morris as Auburn's offensive coordinator. Listen, he was there for the bowl game, but he was basically an observer at that point. And I'm sure he had some influence, but it wasn't his offense at that point. He wasn't the guy that we knew was going to be calling plays at that point. All of that now has been said by the head coach. I believe he is sincere when he says that. And I think he has trust in Chad Morris with this offense. He has more of a relationship with Chad Morris as an offensive coordinator, perhaps, than any offensive coordinator that he's had working underneath him. I mean, both of these guys were legendary high school coaches that have gone on and to be very successful on the college level. And this isn't the first time that Gus Malzahn had wanted Chad Morris on his coaching staff. It just this time it worked out for him. And I think he's very excited, talking about Coach Malzahn, of having Chad Morris there. And it'll be fascinating to watch this dynamic this fall and to watch what this Chad Morris offense looks like. And he's got a sophomore quarterback and a guy that was very good as a freshman, but needs to be even better as a sophomore to work with. So, I mean, he's got Bo Nix in his room, not only offensively, but in that quarterback room as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's such a feather in the cap. And just as a coach, just such a stress reliever to know you have a guy that's seen it, that's been through it, that understands it and understands what it takes. And I think you could actually see that help the offensive line, with them having a guy back there they know that's experienced. But, kind of something I wanted to shift gears for 1 second and talk about kind of what you do a little bit, Andy, because it's fascinating to me, having being a coach and obviously a fan that watches, as a guy that I know you followed the games your whole life, you're a sports guy like I am. When you're in the middle of a game, you're doing the play-by-play, you're having to keep everybody informed. Is there sometimes, or is there some mechanism that you use to keep yourself from, kind of not watching it as a fan, but not going over that line to where, you're not getting out the information that you need to? Because I think you do a great job of getting the information out.
I appreciate that. I guess it's years of doing this, because let's be honest. I mean, when I was starting out, I had a lot to learn. I thought I knew it all, and obviously I did not. One of the things that I don't know if I'm going to completely answer what you're looking for, but one of the things that I always try to keep in mind, even in the midst of the most intense game that we're doing, is that moms and dads of these players are likely listening to that game.
Yeah.
And I try and keep that in mind when a mistake is made in a game like that. But it's interesting to go back and listen to games and to talk about games. And I don't know if it's the right way to put it. You kind of get in a zone. You're working.
Yeah.
That this is what you do. And not until the game and your day is over do you kind of start to think about the impact of that game. Here's an example for you. The Iron Bowl this past year. I mean, we're on the air 3 hours before kickoff, and there are other schools that do longer pregame shows than we do. But I'm typically getting to the stadium about 5 hours before kickoff. So it becomes a long day. And then after the game itself, then I go down to the field and do Coach Malzahn. We tape Coach Malzahn's TV show. So it's a long day, but it's an incredibly enjoyable day. But through that time, and we typically, if it's a home game, our crew has a chance, or at least has had in the past had a chance, to gather for a meal, and we'll walk across from the arena to the east side of Jordan-Hare Stadium to do our pregame show. So we're talking football. We're catching up on the week. Guys, how you doing? How's the kids doing? If they had a big ball game the day before, the night before, that type of thing. But we're talking football at that point, and that's what that pregame show is about. We're talking to fans, but we've got former players and coaches, and we're talking about different aspects of the game. And listen, I'm guessing that Eli does this at Alabama and all over the Southeastern Conference. We're talking football during breaks of the game. When we're in a commercial break, we're talking about trends that we see, or maybe a call from an official that we're talking about, or just it's pretty intense. I mean, we get a break at halftime where we can grab a bite to eat or use the restroom or something like that, but then it's right back to it. And it's not really until after that game, that day, that broadcast is over, and I have a chance to walk from the stadium to my car. And in the past, I've parked over at the Coliseum, Bear Dues Coliseum. But I kind of get a chance to reflect back on what this day was like, whether it was a big game or whether there's a point I'm like, really, I wish I'd have called this better, or did I make a mistake here, and that type of thing. And then, of course, when I get home, then my wife, Jan, who's had season tickets for Auburn longer than we've known each other, then we're talking about the game too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of talk about it during the game and after the game, at least in my house.
Yeah, so it's consuming. It's all consuming, and I've always wondered that because again, different perspectives and the impact and just the amount of people that at the end of the day you're really talking to, which I'm sure is just an unbelievably vast amount. Do you ever, after a broadcast or even after a show or after a Tiger Talk, or let's just leave it at the game broadcast, I'm sorry, when you're in that zone, do you ever go back when you're listening back to it and be like, man, I don't remember saying that? Not in a bad way, but just like I was in the zone. I don't even remember saying that, but it was good information, but I don't even remember it.
Not very often.
Okay.
I typically remember what I've said, good or bad, in a broadcast, and there are times where I'll cringe going, oh, I know what's coming next. or if it's it's a call that I like, that, I kind of file that away, called that play well, or didn't call this play well, or misidentified an individual on the play. So, I've done this for an awful long time now. This was my first year in this role, but I've been a part of Auburn broadcasts, whether it be women's basketball or football as the locker room host, or baseball working with Rod, or whatever. I've done a lot of games over a lot of years, and it sure has been enjoyable. And I sure enjoy the relationship with the people that I work with that crew, Jake. I mean, getting to work with Paul Ellen and Ronnie Brown and Jason Campbell and Stan White and Brad Law and Gene Dulaney, who's our spotter and statistician.
I know Jay. I kind of grew up with Jay a little bit, his son. So he was a year older than me, but I knew him pretty well.
Yeah, guys that, we're together each week. And you know what it's like to be part of a team.
Exactly.
Whether it's that coaching team or your broadcast team or whatever. And we've got a text chain with our Auburn Network crew that we talk to from time to time about just how we're doing from a personal standpoint to games or stories that are out there. So it is a family, and Rod talked about this a lot.
Yeah,
just how much of a family that network crew is, and he was absolutely and is absolutely right. It is definitely a family. We care for each other professionally and certainly personally as well.
Yeah, and again, it's something where you can tell, the chemistry that you guys have on the air. You can obviously tell you guys know each other and that you're prepared. And I think obviously as a guy in your position, that's one of the best compliments that you can get. And is it something you always wanted to do, Andy? Was this something that you knew, like, this is what I'm going to do? I have to do it because I want to do it so bad.
Jake, it's a story that I've told many times now. When I was 6 years old, now this is going to date me, okay? The St. Louis, and I grew up near St. Louis, Missouri. I grew up in a small farming town about 50 miles outside St. Louis. So the Cardinals, the baseball Cardinals, even the football Cardinals at that time, and the St. Louis Blues, I mean, those were the teams that I listened to growing up. And the Cardinals won the World Series in 1967. And I know that's before your time. Just a few years, I know. But my father, who was also a big Cardinals fan, grew up in Indiana. Dad was a Stan Musial fan. When the Cardinals won the World Series, they put out a record of highlights, an actual LP.
Oh, man.
And so Dad brought that home one day, that probably later that winter in 1967. And I listened to that, and it was two Hall of Fame broadcasters on there. Harry Carey, who probably grew to prominence even more so as the Cubs broadcaster until he passed away.
Yep.
And Jack Buck, who is an absolute legend in St. Louis. So that's the radio crew that we listened to.
That's incredible.
Growing up. So, I mean, I have that. And then there was one other broadcaster growing up that was the St. Louis Blues broadcaster from day one until he passed away from cancer. And that's another Hall of Famer by the name of Dan Kelly. So I grew up listening to these icons in broadcasting. And honest to goodness, that's at that point, I knew that's what I wanted to do. Now, at the time, my idea was to become the next St. Louis Cardinals broadcaster, Well, that didn't quite work out, but and worked in Bloomington out of college in Indiana State in Terre Haute, went to Bloomington, Illinois, did Illinois State games for a year, worked on the SIU broadcast in Carbondale for 4 years, Carbondale, Illinois, and then moved to Auburn in 1988, and was fortunate enough that the play-by-play job for women's basketball and Joe Champy was open that year, and I did that for 31 years. Wow. And then now it's 26 years ago, Rod had already been doing baseball at Auburn for 2 years, and then I moved in, and we worked together for a quarter century. We worked together for 25 years until his passing. Yeah. So, it's all I've ever trained for. I didn't have a minor in college. I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. This was it. This is what I was going to do, and it's what I've done for my entire career.
Kind of climb into your personal kind of favorite moment section of your mind on this next one. What did you enjoy more being in your position, the 2013 Auburn football season or the 2010 Auburn football season?
Those teams are so different. And when you think of 2010, I think a lot of it, you think about Cam Newton, and rightfully so. I mean, he was a prolific player for his 1 year at Auburn. But that team was really good in a lot of aspects. Yeah. You've got a major trophy winner on offense. You've got a major trophy winner on defense. You've got a lot of seniors on that defense, a lot of seniors on that offensive line. Yeah. And you had a senior place kicker and a guy that won a couple ball games for you in his career. So I don't think 2010 was nearly as surprising as 2013 was. I mean, you come in after a terrible year the year before, a year where, you don't win an SEC game. And Gus Malzahn is back now in his first year as a head coach with an unproven quarterback. And all of a sudden, after a loss to LSU, that team just catches fire. Yeah. And then wins two of the most miracle finish games that you will ever find, let alone 2 games in 2 weeks in the Miracle at Jordan-Hare and then kick 6. And then, you beat a Missouri team, and now you're playing for a national championship. And I can't think of hardly anybody that thought at the beginning of that year that team would have a chance to play in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, nobody did.
For a national championship, especially after the loss to LSU.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They're just so different. I mean, it's the same man running his offense in Gus Malzahn. That's one of the constants there. But the teams are just so different. Yeah. You've got young tailbacks on both of those teams that are emerging at that point. And, one team runs the table and wins the national championship. And Jake, after that broadcast was over, our engineer, Patrick Tisdale, and our producer, Brad Law, were tearing down the equipment. And the rest of us were gathered around a circular table there at what at the time was the University of Phoenix Stadium. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of looked around the table at each other like, can you believe this has finally happened?
They did it.
Because, listen, 83 Auburn should have won a national championship. Yep. 93, they didn't get a chance. 04, for goodness sake. Yeah. They didn't get a chance to win a national championship. So, this hasn't happened since 1957. It had never happened in any of our lifetimes of the gentlemen that were sitting around that table. Yeah. That day. And so you go from that, and in my career, I've never seen a locker room more devastated after a loss than the loss to Florida State in the national championship game at the Rose Bowl. Because you're 13 seconds away from, for goodness sakes, from winning the national championship. Yeah. You just need one deflected pass or one misstep by Florida State, and you've won a miracle national championship. Yeah. And it goes from that. It goes from that to the loss, and that's the toughest post-game show that I've ever had to do in a locker room. Listen, there were a lot of those great, elation moments talking with coaches and players after wins, but that was the toughest after a loss. It was tough to get players to come on that post-game show, and to his credit, Nosa Igwe was one of them that did. Yeah. And I went up to Nosa afterward, and I said, listen, when we were done, I said, listen, I know that wasn't fun, but I really appreciate the fact that you stepped up and did that post-game show with me, because I'm not sure I'd have wanted to do it as well. So they're so different. I mean, there was so much character on both of those teams, but they were so different. And the seasons ended. I mean, one a mountaintop and one just in despair.
Yeah.
After that game back after the 13th season.
Yeah. And can you, if you don't mind, Andy, just kind of in closing, winding this down, can you kind of talk about, with the amount of time that you spend around these guys and the amount of interviews that you do with them, and, you know them most of the time for 4 years, 5 years, and, something happens like that, they lose a big game or they had a fumble that people think cost the game. Can you just kind of talk about how, as a guy in your position, how you do, you kind of hurt for them sometimes too, because you know them.
There's no question about that. It's a great way to put it, Jake, because you do hurt for those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to know them. Not you don't get to know all of them really well, but you get to know a couple of these guys, and you follow their careers. And here's an example. A guy like Jeremiah Jensen. Yeah. A guy whose career was on that upward trajectory, and then he gets taken out in that Texas A&M game.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people at that point thought Jeremiah would never play football again. And not only does he play football, he becomes a really good player for Auburn and a really good leader for Auburn. And it was easy for me, and I think a lot of people, to pull for a Jeremiah Jensen, because he did everything right. He came back, and he has a chance now at an NFL career. He's a guy that I will root for on Sundays. I want to see him do well, because you do get to know these. And listen, it's the same way for the coaches. You get to know the coaches that you cover, whether it's a legendary coach like Hal Baird or Joe Champy that I've covered. You want these head coaches to do well. You want these assistant coaches to be successful. So, it's not just that the team that you covered lost. It's those guys lost as well. And or at least you have an idea how much it hurts for those guys to come out of a game like that one.
Definitely, and I don't think you could have put it any better than that. And Andy, again, man, I really want to thank you for joining us. We got to get you back on if that's possible before the season.
Sure. Be glad, Jake.
Everybody can hear you on Tiger Talk. Obviously, they can. I want you to go ahead and tell you where they can hear you, because you know it way better than me. You've been doing it, and you know it.
Well, what we're doing right now is we're doing a weekly podcast called the Talking Tigers Podcast. It comes out Monday mornings at 8 o'clock at auburntigers.com. This morning's podcast is with a guy, Jake, that your dad played with, I believe, Quentin Riggins.
Yes.
It was absolutely so. So Quentin is the subject of this week's Talking Tigers podcast. Ronnie Brown will be on the next podcast in a week. And then in 2 weeks, the man I mentioned in your podcast today, Nosa Igwe, who was awesome. Was an awesome Auburn player, now works in Chicago. And we're just going to talk about his career and his life coming up. The most recent one prior to today was a look back at Pat Dye.
Yeah.
And it was an interview that Rod and I did with Coach Dye in December of 2018. It's over an hour long, and he talks a lot. Coach Dye talked about his childhood, working for Bear Bryant at Alabama and those Auburn teams back in the 80s, and, of course, the 89 Iron Bowl game. So that's out there. Go to auburntigers.com. Look for podcasts, and all the Talking Tigers podcasts are there as well. That's what we're doing right now, but I can't wait until Tiger Talk starts up in August, and hopefully we're back at Jordan-Hare Stadium for that opener.
No doubt. I know everybody's excited about that, and everybody go check out that podcast. If Andy Burcham's involved, I promise you it's top notch. It's probably unbelievable stuff, definitely unbelievable stuff. And Andy, like I said, man, I really appreciate you taking some time. I know you're a busy guy, and I look forward to talking to you soon, man.
Jake, take care. You're doing a good job, my friend.
Hey, I appreciate that. We're going to try and keep it going a little bit.
All right.
All right, Andy. Good luck to you. Talk to you soon.
War Eagle, Jake.
Hey, War Eagle. See ya. All right, everybody, and that was Auburn play-by-play man for basketball, football, baseball, just about anything, Andy Burcham. Make sure you go check out that Tiger Talk podcast that he has on auburntigers.com. Like he said, it's on Mondays when it comes out in the morning, so go check that out. I really appreciate you guys joining us. I do want to give a shout-out to Faison. That's at Faison. Feyzan on Twitter. He's the one who did the intro. We got a brand new intro coming too. A little more generic SEC. We'll want to see what y'all think about that. But again, as usual, thank you guys for joining us on another edition of the Jboy Show. And Jboy is gone.